So anyway, here's my beautiful new edition, I have to say, of the new baby of Out of the Woods. I wrote this book for all of the people who are walking the Lyme road. This is a treacherous illness. It is the epidemic of our time, as you can see on my PowerPoint. That's the title of my talks I'm giving this year ahead. We are facing what was akin to the HIV/AIDS epidemic in the 1980s, the polio epidemics prior to that, tuberculosis prior to that. Lyme disease, sadly, is the epidemic of our time. And it went misunderstood and misdiagnosed, and it still is misdiagnosed constantly for the past 40 years since they first discovered it down on the Connecticut shores. This quote I love from Dr. Kenneth Liegner, who's a very famous Lyme physician in the New York State area. He said this at the International Organization of Medicine conference in 2011. In the fullness of time, the mainstream handling of chronic Lyme disease will be viewed as one of the most shameful episodes in the history of medicine because elements of academic medicine, elements of the government, and virtually the entire insurance industry have colluded to deny a disease. This has resulted in needless suffering of many individuals who deteriorate and sometimes die for lack of timely application of treatments or denial of treatment beyond some arbitrary duration. So that's a very powerful statement, and it's sad but very true. In a nutshell, we have two versions of Lyme disease. One is what we would call the acute illness, and then this other is the more chronic form, which really is what we call a tissue disease. And that's where the big confusion lies. The Infectious Disease Society and the Center for Disease Control back in the 1970s, when they first found the bacteria, Dr. Alan Steer at Mass General was called down to Old Lyme, Connecticut by a mother who had noticed a bunch of teenage children who had developed rheumatoid arthritis symptoms that summer, and they'd had that classic bullseye rash. At the time when they finally isolated the bacteria, they thought it was a short-term infection. 2 weeks of antibiotics should knock it out of your system. End of story. People presented with flu-like symptoms, you know, chills, that bullseye rash, joint pains, headache, sweats. And most of those cases, even if you don't treat them, that acute phase would pass. I was one of those cases in the summer of 2000, living here in beautiful New Hampshire in Peterborough. I came down with a terrible summertime flu. And I was always the picture of health with our organic garden and free-range chickens and my homeopathic practice. And wow, what hit me so hard? I thought, my God, I must have picked up some awful bug from one of my clients in the office. I had good passive immunity, but this was vertigo and terrible exhaustion and chills and sweats. And I limped into my business partner's office. We were in a suite together, and he sent me home after doing an exam and drawing some blood work. And he says, I don't know, this looks like it could be a upper respiratory infection, a sinusitis. And he says, let's see what the blood work shows, but I'm sure some strong herbs and colloidal silver you'll pull right out of it. You've always been so robust and strong. I didn't pull out of it, and when I went back in for my blood results, he noticed a tiny elevation of a white blood cell count, which does indicate a bacterial infection. But he didn't think to test me for Lyme disease. It was 2000. And who was thinking Lyme disease in New Hampshire? Everyone was still thinking, oh, that's Cape Cod, that's the Jersey Shore, that's Long Island. So I never got tested. The whole summer was a disaster. I could barely get out of bed. They said it was walking pneumonia if you're this weak, and I got injections of an antibiotic that did nothing. I kind of, with the help of homeopathy and acupuncture, by the end of the summer, I was a little bit more stable. I tried going back to work. This was frightening for me. I had a huge homeopathic practice. I'd been practicing for almost 20 years. People from Maine and Vermont and New York State would come to see me, and it was, you know, horrible for me to witness my own health deteriorating, and my own homeopathic colleagues couldn't even really straighten me out. We would modify my symptoms for a little bit, and then I'd go slipping down again. Finally, that autumn, all they could find on blood work was very high levels of Epstein-Barr virus, which is mononucleosis. But the very, very high levels suggested I had it in a chronic form, which is chronic fatigue syndrome. The rest of the winter was managing this chronic fatigue syndrome, Epstein-Barr virus, with a lot of great herbs. And finally, you know, in severe depression, and now with an assortment of all kinds of other symptoms that you all have heard about, like heart palpitations, anxiety attacks, insomnia, panic attacks, just, you know, migrating pains here, neck, shoulders, knees, you know, it was just a disaster. I went to Florida to visit my dad and get some sunshine. And after a month down there, I felt well enough, and I thought, thank God, we've finally knocked this virus out. I can come home, I can get my life back on track, get the practice going again. I had little children. That lasted all of about 6 weeks, and I start crashing down again. The long and the short of it is 5 years later, I was completely bedridden, wheelchair bound, and my whole nervous system was infected. And foot drop, palsies and tremors, dementia symptoms. Like I couldn't think of words like watermelon. I couldn't make a grocery list. I was emotionally and spiritually fractured. It was devastating. My marriage had collapsed. My savings were totally dissipating, and I had to sell my beautiful house in the countryside because I needed to pay these medical bills in and out of big hospitals, neurologists, you name it, gastroenterologists. I saw them all. It was a dear friend of mine, by serendipity, more than serendipity, I think it was divine guidance. A colleague of mine here in New Hampshire, a clinical nutritionist, was wheelchaired into his office, and I'm about 20 minutes into my story, and he says to me, Katina, this is Lyme disease. And I said, Lyme disease? No, they've tested me 3 times. I am negative on the tests. And he said, well, what lab did they use? And I said, well, I don't know, here's my paperwork. And we looked, and it was Quest. And he says, this is a very faulty test. This ELISA test, E-L-I-S-A, is only good in the very beginning of a brand new infection in the early 2 to 4 months at the most. And the standard from the Center of Disease Control is what they call a 2-tiered test. And this is where there's a lot of confusion for all of you. Is you go to the doctor, you think you've been bitten, or you've got the flu-like symptoms like I did. You say, I think I've got Lyme disease, and they run this ELISA test that I just mentioned. And what happens is that 70% of us come back with a false negative on the ELISA, and they don't run the second test, which is the Western blot Lyme test. If you happen to have come back positive on the ELISA, then the doctors do, according to what they would look up on the internet at the Center for Disease Control or the Infectious Disease Society, they would run that second test, which is the Western blot Lyme test. And this is where it gets even more complicated. The Western blot test has what we call bands on it, okay? I think I'd have to jump ahead here to see the bands, but it's got bands on it, and these bands are bands of specificity. And the CDC said that you have to have 5 bands or more positive to confirm the case as a frankly diagnosed Lyme disease case. The long and short of it is that's not necessary. That was the standard they had created back in the 70s and the 80s when they were doing epidemiological studies on insects and trying to determine infection rates off of insects, and they were kind of cross-counting patient cases with an insect analysis. But the illness, as I told you back in the 70s when they first found it and diagnosed it as a short-term infectious illness, it never got the research that it really needed because AIDS was skyrocketing and friends and family members of ours were dying, and medicine jumped on the AIDS situation, rightfully so, and they put a lot of attention and money into that illness, as we know, and they finally figured it out. Meanwhile, people weren't dying of Lyme like that. I mean, some cases do now, we know, but the majority deteriorate, like I did, over those years. So the money and the research did not get into the whole Lyme disease story. So now here we are, 40 years later, and we have these old standards that our average practitioners are using. They're using that faulty ELISA test, and if you come back negative, they say, oh no, you're fine. It's not Lyme, it's got to be something else. Maybe it's a flu, you know, and then they start looking at other things, run other tests. If you've had the illness long enough, what happens is it moves itself from the bloodstream, and then it's a spirochete. It's in the same family as syphilis. So it spirals its way from the bloodstream into the connective tissues. So it'll show up like fibromyalgia. It'll show up like lupus. It'll show up like rheumatoid arthritis when it hits the joints. And it keeps going. It keeps going. It keeps moving deeper and deeper. So then it gets into more organs. So it can hit your heart and it can hit the lining. And that's like I had the pericarditis. I had those palpitations and arrhythmias. It hits actually most of the endocrine system, people's adrenal glands, their thyroid, pituitary, all of those glands get affected. So that's where the sleep disorders come in. That's where the chronic fatigue comes in because the adrenal glands, everyone remembers them for fight or flight syndrome. They make adrenaline for emergencies, but they also make histamines for allergies, and they also make natural anti-inflammatories. So here you've got an organism in your bloodstream. It's found its way into joints or the fascial lining of your muscles, and you've got chronic inflammation. So the adrenal glands like kick into overdrive, and they're making all of these corticosteroids to try to keep inflammation down. After a while, the adrenal glands can't handle it anymore, and they go into what we call adrenal fatigue, and eventually into adrenal collapse. And that's how you ended up like I was, where I couldn't even lift an arm, take a shower, make a sandwich without help because my adrenals were destroyed. So it daisy chains like that around the endocrine system, and the organism keeps spiraling its way until it gets into the brain. It gets into the spinal fluid, and it augers its way up to the brain. And then you get everything: migraine headaches, seizures, bipolar disorder, everything. All your neurotransmitters get affected. I met a beautiful 16-year-old girl just on Saturday. She's in a wheelchair. She had a 9-hour seizure. She was in one of the big Boston hospitals. They wouldn't even test her for Lyme disease. They let the seizure go on. It gives me the chills thinking about it. Finally, her mother was in tears in my arms, of course. They got out of there, and they finally, through her friend, got to another physician who properly tested her, and sure enough, it was Lyme and one of the co-infections that had gotten all the way into her brain, the poor thing. And there she bravely was at the conference in Worcester in her wheelchair, so proud to be knowing what she had, that she wasn't, you know, just this strange kid who now developed seizures. So it's a very, very dangerous illness. And we want to use these labs, IGeneX and Klongen. Those are the two labs. So if you think you have Lyme disease, or a family or friend you think has Lyme disease, Quest, LabCorp, those traditional labs that we all use, there are commercial labs in the area. They do not have the accurate testing. They also, you're going to get in a situation with your average GP, and I feel bad for the average physician because I say they're driving in the dark. They're not educated on this whole chronic nature of the illness. So they go on, and they just go on what they learned in their 15 minutes in med school, or if they happen to go to the infectious disease website or the Center for Disease Control website, they're going to see the acute picture, which we know is that flu-like picture. I had that flu-like picture, right? And I had a great doctor, but he didn't know to even think about testing. So that acute picture, that lasts for just a few weeks. And then you start morphing, like I told you, into this more chronic picture. I have to say I've had the great good fortune with my wonderful radio show, Limelight Radio, which is Wednesday afternoons at 4 o'clock. You can just Google limelightradio.com or thedrpatshow.com and listen live. However, all the shows are archived forever in podcasts, and they're also on iTunes. I've had it for a year and a half now. I have the most fantastic, cutting-edge doctors, researchers, advocates, patient stories, wonderful, wonderful guests. You've got to go and listen to some of these shows. I have learned so much from my guests, I have to say. Some of these doctors are incredible. Dr. Alan McDonald, Southampton Hospital in 1989, he established, he's a pathologist, researching doc, 7 out of 10 Alzheimer's patients have Lyme spirochetes in their brain. He's also proving currently right now, but the government in the United States will not give him the money. He was featured in that movie Under Our Skin. Some of you maybe have seen that. The MS and Lyme connection. 90% of MS cases have Lyme bacteria involved. He's doing his studies now with Norway. New York State sadly shut him down. There's a big controversy going on here in our country. I don't really get into the politics because I'm a healer and I want to help people heal, but it's a bad situation. I think that they missed the boat, like I said they did, back in the 70s and 80s, and they don't really want to admit that they missed the boat on acknowledging this illness and that we've been using faulty testing. Dr. Richard Horowitz, who many of you have heard of, he's a famous doctor in the Hudson River Valley. He and I teach together at the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck. We'll be teaching again this summer on mind, body, spirit healing. It's a weekend. You've got to come. It's great. He, bless his heart, he's been in conversation in conferences with some of the big doctors, infectious disease docs, and the AMA and the CDC. They're trying to finally get them to change the window, this small little acute window, and acknowledge that it is a chronic illness. The doctors in Europe call it a tissue disease. And I think that's a really good way to describe it. When it goes out of the acute phase and it migrates into the body like that, it's a tissue illness, and it mimics autoimmune disorders because your immune system really has to go into overdrive. I've already told you this about how it augers its way into tissues, glands, organs, nerves. I'm a homeopath, which is a healing art that dates all the way back to the 1700s. It was very popular in this country up until the 1930s. In fact, homeopathic medicine had a stronger position than what we would now call traditional medicine. But when pharmaceuticals got invented, a lot of the herbal-based remedies, the homeopathic remedies, the juice fasts, all those kinds of things got pushed to the wayside. I have to say, though, that homeopathy is a great, great healing art for this illness because they're these finely diluted substances from nature. We use the expression likes treat likes. So an example would be if you came to the office and you had an allergy and you had tearing eyes and you were sneezing and your nose was running, one of the remedies I might give you would be, its Latin name is Allium cepa, which is red onion. Because what does red onion do? It makes you tear and sneeze and gives you runny nose. So that's homeopathy. It's a system of matching. So with Lyme disease, it's a very good player because we don't care, you know, what the name of the illness is. We go by what your symptoms are. So if, let's say, like I had a lot of right-sided pain, I had a lot of right-sided shoulder, hip, a lot of right-sided pain. I didn't want to move. I was cranky and irritable. I was thirsty a lot. And it was a remedy picture that goes by the name of Bryonia. Okay, that's also a big liver cleansing remedy. Bryonia was a wonderful helping remedy for me. It would get rid of the pains, and it would help my whole energy levels pick up. So homeopathy is a wonderful player. I have to give it a plug. We have some homeopaths in the state, which is great. Not all states of the country do. But my biggest really, well, first of all, we're going to come back to this one. What I want to say from Dr. Dietrich Klinkheart, and then I'm going to give you my treatment philosophy. Dr. Dietrich Klinkheart is out in Seattle, Washington. Some of you may have heard of him. He's very famous and really renowned for Lyme disease in treating the totality of the human being, not just going after the infection, but what is going on in your life that made you so susceptible to this illness ransacking you. And that is a big question, because some of us get, like I did, extremely trashed. It hits the nervous system. Other people can get infected, and they just might have a little bit of an infection, and it doesn't really give them too much trouble. They might have some headaches, a week or so of not feeling well. They go on some antibiotics, and they pull right out of it. It's what we call susceptibility. And Dr. Klinkheart says this organism destroys the best of us. It attacks the brightest, the most refined, creative, and evolved of human beings. The highest caliber of our gene pool is being destroyed. My experience exposes that nervous system dominant constitutional types are most devastated by Lyme disease in the acute and chronic form. This is my philosophy on treatments, because I know you all want to know how to get well. This is what that brilliant nutritionist did with me. And now when I go to the conferences 15 years later, or 12 years later, I'm hearing the best of the doctors now following the same protocol that my nutritionist did with me, and I know this is why I recovered. Number one, chances are your body is toxic. And the organisms themselves create what we call endotoxins. And the endotoxins that they release are loaded with ammonia. Okay, and ammonia is when in your bloodstream. I mean, you smell ammonia like in smelling salts, and you know it's strong. So imagine ammonia like in your body, flowing around, and it keeps building up, and it keeps building up, and it keeps building up, because these organisms keep replicating, and they have hatch-out cycles, and every 6 weeks there's a whole new batch of them, and they keep releasing all this ammonia. So you have all this brain fog, and then you can't think like I did, and your thought process are deteriorating, and your mitochondria start to collapse, and your body gets very toxic. So number one is we want to open up the detox pathways. And the detox pathways, our body has the digestive tract. The liver is a big giant filter, like an air conditioning filter. And then it uses our whole digestive tract to cleanse the bloodstream of chemicals and impurities and toxic builds up. And then we have the kidneys and the urinary system, which are always cleaning our fluids. We have the spleen, which is on the left side of our ribs, and the lymph glands. So when you get swollen lymph nodes, that's because your body's working really hard. The thymus and the lymph glands are pumping out these T and B fighter cells to go after this infection. But the spleen is like the big graveyard. It's responsible for collecting all of these lymphocytes and white blood cells, collecting them and then getting rid of them. But the lymphatic system only works with circulation. So when you become exhausted and bedbound or sofa-bound, your lymphatic system doesn't get a workout. Also, the lymphatic system works best when we invert, like we go upside down against gravity. So that's why kids, when they're doing somersaults or they're hanging from this swinging bars upside down, all of that uses the lymphatic system. So the sicker you get, the more sluggish your lymphatic system gets. So detoxification is really key. There's great homeopathics for it. There's also wonderful herbs like milk thistle and dandelion root and burdock. They help cleanse. Berberry, which cleanses the liver, the kidneys, and marshmallow root. These are all natural herbs you can take in tea forms or tinctures to help detoxify. The organisms love carbohydrates. In particular, they love anything that turns to sugar quickly. So we often say trying to go on a very low white flour, or no flour really. Better to have like corn and millet, and go on a high protein, high vegetable diet, more important. So that would help in detoxification. So detox is number one. Then the next part of the equation, which I think is essential, which is where the Western medical community has no resources unless you get to an integrative medicine doc or a functional medicine doctor, but where naturopaths and acupuncturists and homeopaths are really skilled at, is rebuilding the damages and depletions. Okay, so what a naturopath would do, or like my clinical nutritionist did, or a functional medicine doc would do, is they use specialty metabolic profile analysis tests. And they can examine with these special tests. They're not the regular clinical tests that they would run on a thyroid or run on your digestive tract. They're specialty tests. Genova, Genova, is one of the labs. Another one is called real-time labs. So they can check out what the metabolic function is going on for your digestive tract, let's say, if you have irritable bowel syndrome. Or they can check out your hormonal profiles. They can check out what's going on with your brain chemicals, your neurotransmitters. If you're having anxiety or depression, insomnia, they can figure all of that out and find out where all these depletions and damages are, because this is like a huge piece of this Lyme story. Beyond the acute infection is when you get into the chronic picture. Like, I think you got it, right? I explained to you how it's moving its way, and it's eating up things. It loves fat, so it's eating the fatty layer of our muscles. It's eating the myelin and sheaths of the nerves. That's why people show up with MS patches. It's eating the layer of the heart. I mean, it's horrible when you think about it, but that's where the organism is living. So you end up with these damages and depletions. But the human body, touch wood, is a miracle. It's extraordinarily resilient. It's extraordinarily adaptive. And if we give our bodies what it needs, if we get the right supplements in there, and you can use these specialty tests, you can rebuild yourself. Because look at me, I'm 100% well. And in some ways, I'm probably even more balanced than I was before I got sick, because I still take a lot of great supplements like CoQ10 and evening primrose oil and quercetin, which are all really restorative supplements. Quercetin nourishes the adrenals. It helps keep allergies at bay. CoQ10, everyone knows it for healthy heart, but it's also a longevity supplement. So you can rebuild yourselves from the damage. So Dr. Klinkheart, the naturopaths that are dialed into this, and the very few Lyme disease doctors of the country, and we think there's maybe 100 at the most, which is pretty sad, that really understand the illness. Detoxify the body, rebuild the depletions, kill the bug. Okay? A lot of mistakes happens when you go for the bugs first and you haven't opened up the detox pathways. Because what happens is you start killing off the organisms, whether it's antibiotics or herbs, and then you feel like hell because you're killing the bugs, and your liver and your spleen, as I've already explained to you, are pretty compromised. So you feel disgusting. And you feel like, I can't even handle this treatment. I don't want to take these things. I'd rather just lope along at half pace. The trick is opening up those detox pathways first. So in my case, the nutritionist had me on 8 weeks of detox before we even went near any of the bugs. So I'll talk about the acute form of the illness in a second, but in the chronic form, depending on how sick you are, you might need some antibiotics. My case, we didn't use antibiotics. It was 2005 when I got diagnosed, and the nutritionist said to me, you know, talk to your practitioner, your general practitioner. You know, long-term antibiotics are not always successful. They are with some cases, but a lot of times they cause dependency and even damages. And your gut's already a mess. He goes, I know you've got candida and yeast problems. It's going to be a disaster. He says, talk it over, but as sick as you are, I've seen worse, which I thought was like, what? Someone's worse than me? But when I met that little girl with the seizures, I could validate, yes, worse than me. So we started with the Cowden protocol, which some of you have heard about. The main herb in that is cat's claw. And the liquid version of it goes by the name of Samento, S-A-M-E-N-T-O. It's a powerful herb from the Amazon, and it's an antimicrobial, and it's specific for Lyme Borrelia bacteria. And so we went long and slow with me. I just took 1 drop twice a day for weeks upon weeks, and then I worked up to 2 drops, and then to 3 drops. And even though the bottle said to get up to 15, I never made it past 6 drops twice a day. And it took 5 years in totality to get 100% well, but at the 2-year mark, I was about 75% better. The last years were rebuilding all these damages because I had terrible damage to my nervous system. I had crippling migraines like 4 days a week. I had the dementia. I had all my neurotransmitters were messed up. As I told you, my adrenals were a mess. I had mitochondria dysfunction, which is in one of the autoimmune classifications. A lot of you remember mitochondria from biology class. They take the glucose that we get from our food and they convert it into ATP, which is fuel. But if you can't get the nutrients into the cells to run the Krebs cycle, you can't make energy. So I had mitochondria damage. So that took a while to rebuild all of that. Beautiful product, pure encapsulations. I really should be carrying their pamphlets with me. Pure encapsulations, they're like the Clinique of vitamins. They make mitochondria ATP, which was wonderful for energy restoration. So I want to backtrack just for this one here because I want to mention a little bit about the co-infections, which ticks carry. So the Center for Disease Control in 2013, they actually came out of the box and they said the old 30,000 cases per year approximately of Lyme disease is inaccurate. It's more like 300,000 cases that are contracted in the United States annually. We all think that's a lowball number, but that's what they're acknowledging. We think the figure's more in the million-ish range. We think it's bad up here in New England, and it is. It's bad here because our ticks are severely infected. Like Hollis, 90% of ticks are carrying Borrelia burgdorferi, which is the #1. That's what Lyme disease is. So New Hampshire is one of the most afflicted per capita. Okay, so we might be a small state with a small population, but our population is very infected with Lyme disease. We might get into New York State, which has a much bigger population, and they might have a huge number of infected ticks, but their population isn't as infected as ours. See what I'm saying? You get down south, it's horrible, horrible. I've been in North Carolina and Florida speaking. People are in there, they have had like 5 bullseye rashes in one summer alone, and the doctor's saying, no, we don't have Lyme disease down there. Those are spider bites. I mean, in wheelchairs or in gray. I mean, my heart's breaking, like 200 plus people in a room. Not one doctor in the whole state of North Carolina was treating Lyme disease. So that's why I say doctors are driving in the dark. The poor doctors, I feel bad for them. They have not been given the proper information. So what I suggest is you go to the website ILADS, I-L-A-D-S, Let's see where it is here. I'll find it for you. Michael told me I would be doing this. I'd be jumping around. Okay. ILADS.com, that's the International Lyme and Associated Disease Society. They train doctors how to deal with Lyme disease. And what I say is go to their website, print out the doctor training page, and give it to your doctor or a family friend who's a doctor or whatever and say, please take the ILADS training. It's like a week training for them. We're talking about changing lives of thousands of people. Every doctor that gets educated by the ILADS training, and we've got to do this at the grassroots level. So the other big organizations here are Tick-Borne Disease Alliance, very prominent at raising money for research. Also LymeDisease.org. They are responsible for our support groups throughout the country. A wonderful woman, Phyllis Mervine, started the first support group 25 years ago in California, and the support groups around the country are really what are holding people together because this illness is treacherous. As I said, I wrote this book. I wrote it because I thought I was crazy. I thought I was cracking up, and you know, here I am in and out of these big hospitals and 17 neurologist visits, and they're just saying, I don't know what's wrong with you. And I couldn't accept that I was so vital, a skier, a hiker, canoeing, whitewater canoeing. You know, how could I go from this picture of health to be so deteriorated and dissipated? And the emotional side of the illness is devastating. You feel abandoned, betrayed, isolated, confused, scared. So Out of the Woods is a great success story. It's filled with hope and inspiration. And this new edition, I'm happy to say, the new publisher, Skyhorse, actually, their first author in their new imprint called Helios, they let me build in more chapters in the back on treatment. So I put in the homeopathic remedies, I put in the herbs, and I put in the detox methods. And I also put in a symptom chart so people can look and see, oh my God, I have like the majority of these symptoms. Or, you know, they can give it to their sister and say, look at this section in the back and read the section on the symptom chart because I think you've got Lyme disease. I don't think you have fibromyalgia. Dr. Sam Shore, he says he tested 250 of his patients with chronic fatigue syndrome. 90% of them had Lyme bacteria in their systems. So this is as I said, the epidemic of our century. Every approximately 30 years, a massive infectious illness sweeps Western civilization. I said, look back, you can see AIDS, you can see polio, you can see diphtheria, you can see tuberculosis, smallpox, yellow fever, malaria. This is the epidemic of our time. Our society's off balance. I think there's a lot of reasons why the illness is surging. Our food chain is really disrupted, as we know. We've got a lot of genetically modified foods, which our body can't digest as well as what our grandparents were eating. Our foods are sprayed with a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, which put more chemicals into our system, and that poor liver is going to work really hard. So we end up with the toxic burden, like I mentioned. We've got too many sugars in the food chain. If you read the labels on things, you're like shocked at all of the corn syrup and high fructose, and you know, we didn't really realize it, but it kind of been creeping its way in since the 1950s and 60s. It's like every kind of, you know, food, unless you really, really look hard and look for organic or really read your labels. Like, I remember when my children were little, I would be hunting for tomato sauces and ketchup that didn't have corn syrup in them. Or I was like thrilled when I finally found a juice that was not from a concentrate, because a concentrate is just really juices that have been heated up and then concentrated and condensed, so that all the fructose in them becomes now a very solvent sugar, which sends your blood sugar spiking up and down. We end up with a lot of diabetes in our culture. So when you add all these things in, you see that their food chain's been messed around with. We have a lot of pesticides and fertilizers, been exposed to cosmetics, vaccines, dental fillings, like all of this stuff leaches like into our systems. So we end up with a lot more chemicals in there than when we were designed to. Then we live like these rapid lives. Like I have to even catch myself, because even though I meditate every morning for 45 minutes and really keep myself calm and quiet, the pace of living is fast. Even up here in our beautiful northern New England, I mean, God forbid these people in the cities, it's like electric fast. And there go the adrenal glands. They have to work really hard because they are only supposed to make that adrenaline for fight or flight, but you're dashing to get the train, or oh my God, I'm late for picking up my kid at school, or I gotta get something in the oven, and then I'm like multitasking on the phone. I mean, that's adrenaline pump. So when you put all this stuff together, you start to see what happens is that we're making too much acid in our system because those adrenal glands are pumping. We've got all the chemicals in there. Now we've got the whole EMF thing, the whole electromagnetic frequencies. Here I am in front of the computer, and then we've got the cell phones, and then we've got, you know, satellite towers and cordless phones in the house, and their energy states, right? And ideally, the human being is supposed to be more like the other mammals of the earth and live at a pace that, you know, is connected to the seasons, and it's connected to the sun and the moon and the cycles. And we've defied it all, right? We live with electricity, and we go to sleep at odd times, and we don't have those rhythms anymore. So I think it's kind of like a perfect storm. And then you add in global warming, so these ticks now have migrated to habitats that they didn't used to live in before. And this organism, this Borrelia organism, is very adaptive. It's actually clever, and it morphs itself to keep itself alive. So it's a perfect storm. It's a perfect storm. So the best thing we can do is take good care of ourselves. The best thing we can do is do our daily tick checks as soon as the snow starts melting. What I do is when I'm out there in the garden or I'm walking the dog or whatever, I just take everything off in the mud room. It goes into the dryer on hot for 30 minutes. You don't even have to go into the washing machine. Go right into the dryer on hot. 30 minutes on a high heat will kill them because they shrivel up in the heat. And you do a really good thorough tick check everywhere. And I brush the dogs down like every day in the summer, outside, not inside, because if you brush, and in the spring, those little baby nymph ticks are so tiny, they're like smaller than like the period on the book. So this is my, I'm going to pass these out to you or pick them up before you go. This tick removal, Tick Ease. This is a new but easy removal. It's got two ends of it. The one end is for when you have the big old fat like dog ticks. You can use that end to pull those kind of ticks off easily because you want to ease the tick out of your body. You don't want to yank them. Like I remember as a kid, we'd just get them real close and yank them. Forget the Vaseline, forget the hot match thing. All of that scares the ticks. They freak out and then they vomit. And when they vomit, everything that's in the digestive tract gets into your bloodstream, and there goes if they're infected with Borrelia and the co-infections. Remember I wanted to mention those? So the on the other end of this is to get the little baby ticks out, to get the nymphs out. And it goes so far as this company has then a little case that you can then send them off for testing. And Igenics Labs, which I mentioned for blood testing, also does tick testing. And then there's another company, I have their things at the back table, Mainly Ticks. Our friends up in Maine, I'll be there twice this summer speaking. Mainly Ticks, they do tick testing. And you can get a little tick testing kit, that's a mouthful, from them, and it's good for like 3 ticks. So you can like keep it in the house and you can send your ticks off because hey, if you come back and your tick's positive, then you want to go on treatment. So the co-infections you've heard of, Bartonella, it's a parasite, really very similar to rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. Common symptom is the soles of your feet are really tender, really bad joint pains, especially in the extremities, horrible insomnia, terrible headaches, anxiety, Bartonella. Babesia, it's a bacteria, but it's very similar to malaria. We're pretty certain I had Babesia because when I had summertime flu with the chills and the fever, I remember saying to the doctor, you know, this feels like malaria, because I had malaria when I was a teenager. And he's like, yo, we don't have malaria up here. And but I said, it just feels like malaria. It's got the same feeling. Well, Babesia is very common on the East Coast, and it's very similar to malaria. It's got these cyclical cycles of sweats, night sweats, horrible headaches, vertigo. Another one is mycoplasma, which was proven in the 1930s by Dr. McPherson Brown to be the cause of rheumatoid arthritis. It's in between a bacteria and a virus. And he, back in the 1930s, fabulous book I read way back in 1983 or 84, I can't remember, The Arthritis Breakthrough. Low doses of tetracycline, like pediatric doses, would cure rheumatoid arthritis. But they also just invented cortisone. And that was such a powerhouse. It seemed so much better, like, oh my God, a few shots of cortisone in that knee and no more arthritis. So Dr. Brown's work kind of got pushed to the wayside, except there's a place called the Road Back Foundation in Boston, and they kept his work alive. And now we're finding, what is the main drug they use for Lyme disease? Tetracycline. So it helps with Borrelia and it helps with mycoplasma. So the ticks carry a lot of things. They carry the Epstein-Barr virus, which I had, which in astronomical levels. They carry Rocky Mountain spotted fever. They can carry a lot of different things. The testing we have at the labs is not super great on these, but IGeneX and Klongen, you want a PCR test for these co-infections. And if you go on their website, you'll see all the information there about these different, different tests if you think you're suspicious of co-infections. So we're getting into springtime. I know when Deb and I planned this talk, we thought maybe the snow would be melting. And that we would be seeing the snowdrops and the tips of the crocus buds, but as we know, it's been a wicked hard winter. But I want you to be alert, okay? And I want you to pay close attention like I do, put those clothes in the dryer, brush the animals down. You can get your yard sprayed. JP Pest Services has permethrin, which is made from a chrysanthemum derivative. It will keep the ticks counts very low. I also have another product, I don't have the pamphlets for them, tick tubes. Have any of you heard about tick tubes? Fantastic. Brilliant idea. It looks like the inside of a paper towel roll, and it's stuffed with cotton batting. And the cotton batting is moistened with permethrin, which is this chrysanthemum derivative. And you put these around your property, like on stone walls or in the wood pile. I think they say 5 of these per acre. And what happens is the rodents, the chipmunks, the squirrels, mice, they come and get the cotton batting to feather their nests, and it starts killing off the ticks. So one woman I remember I met over in the Seacoast area, was over near Newburyport actually. She had a farm. She said the year before she was pulling like 5 ticks a day off of her pets. After one summer of tick tubes, she could go at least 2 weeks without seeing a tick on one of her pets. So they're definitely worth it. They definitely do the trick. And you just Google them. I don't, as I said, you're the first stop of the season, so I don't have all my materials out yet. But tick tubes is really easy. Yeah.
Could you make your own tick?
You can.
Using the permethrin?
Yes.
In the sporting goods store?
Exactly. And a lot of people do. They just get a lot of cotton, douse it, and just stuff toilet paper ones or paper towel ones. About 5 of the paper towel ones per acre. This is my message. I know I've been saying a lot, and then I want to take your questions. That Lyme disease asks us to unite the two hands of healthcare, the scientific diagnostics and pharmaceuticals of Western medicine with the restorative therapeutics of natural medicine, because 2 hands working together are better than 1. Our country got very lopsided. We lost a lot of the natural healing modalities. Europe, South America, Canada, Asia, they have integrative medicine. They have, you know, all the French doctors are trained in homeopathy. England and has herbalists on street corners. South America, you know, Asia, they're famous for their traditional medicine. So this illness asks for both. And I didn't talk much about the acute form of the illness, but what we'll say is that it's better to take 4 to 6 weeks of doxycycline, which is not a dangerous antibiotic. It's what they use for acne. It's better to take 4 to 6 weeks of doxycycline or tetracycline than to risk this infection getting, like it did with me, way the hell into your body. 2 weeks won't do it. The organism is a very slow replicating organism, like strep or staphylococcus replicate like in hours. And that's why you can like take a throat swab on a strep throat and they know like in 24 hours they can culture it. It's 6 weeks for the Lyme bacteria to replicate. So that's why these blood tests where they're looking for antibodies are so faulty. That ELISA test that I mentioned, so faulty, because where is this organism in its replication cycle? So the best hope now is a new test they're looking at. It's called an eye spot test. It was on one of my slides here from neuroscience, and they're looking for antigens. Okay, I'm not going to go through that whole science class with you, but antigens is an earlier indicator than an antibody. Okay, so we're hoping that this new trend with the antigen test is going to take us to faster testing, because my personal goal is I want to see everybody getting annual screenings for Lyme disease the way I was a child. We had tuberculosis screenings. I'd love it if we had annual Lyme screenings. Some parts of the country, people that work in the park systems or they're loggers, end of the summer, August, September, their doctors put them on 6 weeks or 8 weeks of doxycycline, no matter what, because they just know they've been exposed. So if you think you've got an infection, as I said, the 2 weeks, that old protocol is not going to do it, because that organism, it takes 6 weeks for it to replicate. So that's why most doctors that are ILADS trained will go with the 6 weeks of antibiotics. And if you've had the symptoms for a while, like a few months, they're going to want to probably put you on 3 months, and then they're going to rotate you with a couple of different antibiotics. So it's a complicated illness, and it requires a very knowledgeable doctor. We have several in our state. I can't say them on the recording, but afterwards I can tell you their names. We're very fortunate. Some states of the country have no treating physicians, so we have some excellent doctors here, which is good. So I like this from Wolf Storrell. He wrote Healing Lyme Naturally. He's a naturopath from Europe. He himself had Lyme several times, and he says Lyme disease leaves a person more sensitive even after being healed, or more deeply developed intuition and a more sensitive reaction to the environment are claimed to be part of the post-Lyme state. They tend to cherish quiet meditation in nature. Who knows, maybe it is a way of Gaia, Mother Earth, to help people of today become more sensitive and responsive to the real world of nature. Lyme disease is definitely a journey. These are some good books for you. Why Can't I Get Better by Dr. Horowitz. These are the resources we spoke of. And then this is an excerpt from Out of the Woods. Since I was a small girl, I knew I was meant to help others in this lifetime. I have walked that path with honor and dignity. I feel this evolution through Lyme disease has served a purpose in my life. One obvious one is to share the intrinsic pieces that help me recover, an outcome not all afflicted with chronic Lyme attain. Another is to illuminate the profound facets of emotional and spiritual recovery, which can apply to all forms of illness. Without being emotionally, spiritually, and physically whole, we cannot be well. So I'm here to give you hope that you can beat this illness. I'm also here to answer your questions and help all of you stay healthy and keep yourself protected and get in the right hands when you do think that you're in trouble. And maybe at the time, we'll see how the time goes. At the end, I could read you a tiny bit from Out of the Woods because it is an awfully pretty book. Thank you. I covered a lot of ground there, but let me get your questions. Okay, we've got about a half an hour, so yeah, why don't we start?
Okay. So I guess with your own experience and research that you've seen, do you believe that Lyme is forever? It's hard when you hear you have what would be considered chronic Lyme, and you look at everything, and it really gives you no hope because it says once you have this, it's forever.
Right.
And so to hear stories of people who say they're healed or whole, is that, are you cured? Are you in remission? How do you take that?
In my heart, I feel I'm cured. But I also went so deep into the curative process because, you know, I did so much restorative work. So I think, you know, it is possible that, you know, these bacteria can go into walled off forms called cysts. So it is possible they could be walled off in my body somewhere in cysts. But I'm a healthy host, right? Because I rebuilt all of those damages and depletions. And I said I'm still, even now, I still take good supplements. So it is possible, we don't know for sure, but it is possible that like herpes or other, you know, viruses that don't ever really leave the system, it is possible that maybe a really long-term case that, like mine, that was 5+ years in duration, maybe they're still in there. But in my heart, I think it's out. Because I've had extraordinary amount of stress just in the past year alone, like outside things coming in on me, like car wrecks and surgeries and burglaries and things that emotionally are big high stressors. You would think that if the bacteria was present, it would act up. I want to believe that you can beat it. I know you can beat it if you catch it early. If you catch it early in those early weeks and months, you can get it before it becomes a tissue disease.
That's what I've read too.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that helped a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
And I was just wondering, did you have to take any psychotic medication at that stage, or?
I was almost on the verge of taking it. I was on an anti-anxiety medicine for a long time because we could not control the anxiety in me. It was so run away. And yes, some people have to take an antipsychotic medicine while you're rebuilding the neurotransmitters.
Yes.
But there's wonderful supplements like GABA, you may have heard of. There's holy basil, there's L-theanine, there's St. John's wort. They're all plants and amino acids. Amino acids are a big player. The amino acids and the essential fatty acids are what nourish our brain chemistry. So finding a practitioner, I can give you the name of that wonderful nutritionist that I love, could help you rebuild all of the amino acids and these essential fatty acids, and that gets the brain chemistry straightened out. Because that's what happened. Like, remember how I explained they get in there and they eat up the fatty layer? And then your serotonin and some of the other good neurotransmitters get depleted, and then your brain's misfiring. So yes, I had to take an anti-anxiety medicine for several years in there until we got me balanced out. So don't feel bad if you have to take a medicine while you're being balanced. But I want to get you to that name, the practitioner. Yeah.
On the same lines as that too, I've been toying with, I've also struggled a lot with anxiety,
Yeah.
and panic, and definitely adrenals.
Yeah.
And you know, anything can set me off. Who knows what it's going to be? But I'm curious how much of that is needing to rebuild depletion, and how much of it is just energetic patterns that have been established too, and like what's the difference? Or is there a
Both.
difference?
Yeah, I think it's both. You're definitely right about energetic patterns, because, you know, there's that part of our brain, the amygdala, that's where trauma goes. So if you got scared or you got panicky, it gets stored in the amygdala section of the brain, and you can't get it out of there by talking about it. Like talk therapy doesn't do it. You just can't help it. It's imprinted in there. So EMDR, have you heard of that? Or EFT training?
Yeah.
Okay, so EFT training is these tapping points to help you release trauma.
Yeah.
There's another really good one that worked for me, better than EFT, EMDR. Okay? It's eye movement desensitization, blah, 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 and you actually recall an incident, like we would call one of my panicky incidences, and the therapist would have me relive it, and you either follow something with your eyes, or they have these little wands that you hold, and you relive it, and you just keep going through it until your amygdala releases it. It was really very helpful for me. The other thing for anxiety is the amino acid glycine. That's a really good amino acid. It's water soluble. You can just take like 600 milligrams at a time. It would pull me out of a panic attack like in 20 minutes. I mean, from like the shaking, hysterical panic attacks. So I agree. I hear you. That amygdala part of your brain needs to be repatterned, but then you could also have depletions. So it's twofold.
And as far as rebuilding, I mean, is there? I assume the time that it takes to do that depends on the severity of the
Yes.
depletions, and then assuming you're getting the right things that you need. Does it also come into play, like if your liver is damaged, the liver replenishes itself every so many years?
Right. Well, you know, the good news about the neurotransmitters is really they change like in the hours. So with the proper like rebuilding, we could be seeing a couple months here of you getting more stable. You know, and like me, I was on that anti-anxiety medicine for a while, but when I finally started to wean off of it, because I had then the support of glycine and St. John's wort and, you know, a good acupuncturist, and it was fine. So the brain chemistry can be nourished, I would say, in months. And you know, not overnight, but. Yeah, a little bit about it. I haven't worked with it.
Okay, something like GABA. Kind of
Yes,
GABA.
yes, it does. And
And what about
5-HTP. 5-HTP is the other one too. Yeah, go ahead.
what about the CD57 test?
Yeah, you know, we had a lot of hopes on that test for a while. So the CD57 test, it goes from 0 to like 250. And the lower the number means the more active your immune system is fighting something. So like at my worst, my CD15 was 13. But when I was feeling great and I was out of the woods, it was like up at 180. And I had no symptoms at that point. So doctors were really hopeful for a long time that they could use that CD57 as a monitoring test to see how you're progressing. But then we discovered that Epstein-Barr virus, herpes, AIDS, they also can affect the CD57 test. So it can be used to show your progress, but it might be reflecting also an Epstein-Barr virus or C. pneumonia. This neuroscience lab that I mentioned, the eye spot test, they've got a new test that they're working with right now that Dr. Bradley Bush, he was on my radio show, I think last week. You should go listen to his podcast with me. He talks about this new test that they're using to monitor people's progress as they're going through treatments. Who's next? Yes.
I have Epstein-Barr as a co-infection. Diagnosed in 2009 with Lyme.
Yeah.
I just about 3 weeks ago had a dose of prednisone for 7 days. And that was to treat some, I had multiple joint inflammations. During the course of that, I developed a severe sore throat and no other symptoms, and then now I have just overwhelming fatigue.
Yeah.
And I presume it's that the Epstein-Barr is reactive.
Yeah.
I'm trying to, and I don't have access to my Lyme physician right now for financial reasons, so I go to the VA for my medical care. They don't recognize chronic Lyme.
No. Or probably chronic Epstein-Barr.
No, and I haven't even really discussed any of this with them, so I'm kind of needing to treat myself, but wondering what you...
Yeah, well, you're asking the right person. Because I had a harder time with Epstein-Barr than I did with the Lyme. I mean, I really, you know, like I said to you, at 2-year mark, I was like 75% better, and that cat's claw and teasel root and all those things addressed the Lyme. Fabulous product that I won't live without anymore. It's called monolaurin. You've got to write it down. It's got to be, no, this is for Epstein-Barr virus. It's for what we call retroviruses. Epstein-Barr virus is mononucleosis. It's a retrovirus. They repeat themselves. It's really made from coconuts. It's called lauric acid, but monolaurin is the product by Ecological Formulas. Okay, after the video's off, I can talk to you about the dosage, because I'm not supposed to doctor in front of a crowd. But monolaurin is a fabulous product for these retroviruses. Yeah.
Did you say that the Epstein-Barr is mono?
Yes. Well, it's a mononucleosis infection is caused by Epstein-Barr virus. But they look for a mononucleosis infection with something called a monospot test. But once that's over with, you'll always test positive on a general Epstein-Barr test across the board. So the average doctor doesn't know to look for reactivations, et cetera. So you need to go for these specialty, what they call protein titers. And the ranges are like from 0 to 8. And they consider like above 5 to be an active infection. But those of us that are really sick with Epstein-Barr, like they'd be up in the thousands. So it's a very, it knocks you out. It knocks you out. I mean, the fatigue's unbelievable, unbelievable. I said it's like the worst jet lag of my life, like forever. Anyone else? Oh, look at you guys. You did really great. Well, thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure to come up here to beautiful Concord and to your wonderful library. And thank you, Deb, for coordinating everything.
You can have a seat right here at the signing table.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, I do. Yeah, should I read to you a little bit? Why don't I read to you for just because, right? I'm going to read you a happy section of the book. Let me see. Mastering the Mountain. Okay, so this was a big stride for me as I'm moving in my recovery. Joel was my husband. Joel and I tumble in the chaos of our marital disharmony, fighting relentlessly over daily trifles, money, religion, parenting, responsibilities, and control. Sometimes in the stilted hours of pre-dawn, I lie empty in the haze of my confusion, imagining whether I could survive on my own, away from my own known structure and security. Consciously, with clear intention, I work daily to build up my physical strength and stamina, determined to regain my wholeness, even though trapped in the bungee cords of a now difficult marriage. I want desperately to feel well. With so many years in healthcare, I know how important it is to recondition my body and cardiovascular system. Since the slight upsurge of energy after our Florida sojourn, I want to reinforce this trend. So I pick a mountain to climb, a local one that has a lovely winding trail, a stunning westward view on the summit, and some fascinations of delicate wildflowers and Indian pipe en route. If I can master this mountain, perhaps I can master my illness and even my marriage. And so it begins, my journey to the peak, to a place of beauty, a place of purpose, a place of contemplation. This I aim for with the ken of a seasoned archer. In the gentle mornings of May, I don my well-worn brown Vosk hiking boots and grab my felt fedora and call Echo into the car and head off to the well-tramped trail of Bald Top Mountain. The first few attempts get us only a couple of football fields away from the car before my rasping breath and jangling limbs signal it's time to head back. But it's a start. The carpet of mayflowers crowning the forest floor are green and welcoming. My senses are fed by the dimples of sunshine dancing like sparklers amidst the sheltering heavens of the leaves overhead. Though I'm weak in body, my spirit is nurtured in this abundant wilderness. Sometime in mid-July, Echo and I discover we are midway up a swiftly inclining stretch of trail. It's a marvel to me to discover how my strength is mounting. I see the frolicking stream bubble by and cascading downward over mossy logs and rounded rocks. All summer, my faithful border collie and I address this feat of purpose. 2, 3, even 4 times per day, we inch along further on this path of progress. I'm determined to put this illness and its devastations into their place. Frustration, willfulness, personal purpose, and eventually enthusiasm fuel me onward. Step by step, day by day, I meet the earth, the sky, the summer air, welcoming them so liberally into my swelling pockets and my tentatively healing spirit. As I slowly gain some physical strength, my emotional body grows proportionately in volume. Finally it comes. Echo and I round a bend in the trail, amidst the stunted pines and low-growing blueberry bushes. I follow the rutted footpath as it transitions completely to aged mica and granite, fissured with glacial cracks and speckled with glints of blackened bits of weather. My senses lift a notch. I feel the cooling breeze of altitude. I hear the white-throated sparrows trill in the pine boughs and welcome the sun's glare on my bare arms. Joyfully and with wild abandon, I'm scampering, yes, scampering, and Echo's running even faster a few strides ahead of me, reaching the journey's end. We are there. I stand bold and emblazoned in profound pride on the summit of my mountain peak. The world shimmers in a green glory far below me. Deliriously happy, I twirl around like an 8-year-old, sucking up the magnitude of my achievement. I bend and hug dear Echo, knowing her treasured companionship has bolstered me along. I have mastered the mountain. We sit a bit on the peak, soaking in our feet and the soothing horizon of the violet-tinged distant mountains. I spy the presidential range up north and my favorite climb of them all, Mount Musalak. Some Triscuits and water, an apple, and a handful of low bush blueberries fill my stomach. Soon it's time to head back to the car. On the descent back to the reality of my daily life, I'm buoyed in the euphoria and neurochemical rush of my personal achievement. It feels so good, so satisfyingly good to have worked 4 months and mastered the mountain. I can't help but reflect on the symbolism. As I'm musing on this concept, I come across an elderly, white-haired gnome of a man, gnarled walking stick in hand, and head bent downward, studying the ground as he climbs. "Hi there," I say cheerfully. Misty eyes peer up at me behind wire-frame glasses. His shrunken shoulders are hunched forward. "Good day, dear," he replies. "Nice day to hike." "Certainly so, but I climb in all weather," he says. "You do? Do you hike here often?" "Oh, regularly, you might say. Summer, winter, fall, and spring, I'm out on the trails. I've been battling back leukemia." My mind flip-flops. The only other hiker I come upon today happens to be another determined survivor on a quest like me. "Been at it over 6 years now," he continues. I won't let those wayward blood cells take me over. I find that exercise, particularly climbing in the outdoors, has fed me while the chemotherapy ransacks me. You are a true warrior, I say. A small smile curls his lips. I tell him that today was a really big day for me, too. We end up sharing the stories of our personal journeys through illness and back towards wellness, the kingdom of nature being our guide. We talk for a good 15 minutes. This meeting on the trail feels more than coincidental. In fact, it strikes me as quite remarkable. We part with a hug and a sort of inner blessing towards one another. The true connection of spirit is threaded between us, woven with fellowship and understanding, a form of communion. You've done a great thing for yourself, he says. Don't ever give up your dreams. I smile in agreement. The view is lovely on top, I tell him in parting. It always is, my dear, better than down at the bottom. Elevation has its way of broadening the picture up for us. Remember, perspective can change everything. I nod, absorbing his chestnut of advice. Have a good journey, I call and start down the path. As I approach a scramble of rocks and tree roots, I look back to see the Ancient One, leaning on his staff, stepping with patience, steady and slow, up the steep trail. In the upcoming weeks, as Indian summer's days flourish in a fiesta of color and 70-degree softness, I'm painting landscapes in a near frenzy. My energy is so much better than a year ago. The canvases fly from my fingertips, cloaked in scenes of the region. I'm soaring now in the upsurging of creative endeavors and the joy of realization that I've beaten back the illness. Tackling the mountain was a huge feat, but curing this illness is even bigger. My spirit rises with hope for my future. Perspective can change everything, I think.